we don't really know what is going to happen because Florida will be without Philippe Franks, starting quarterback, for the first time. He's out for the year. I think it was torn ligament ankle. It was a rough looking injury. They'll be going to back up Trask, who doesn't really. I mean, Philippe Franks was not exactly perfect for Dan Mullen's system, but Trask, I think, there's even more of a question mark. So it'll be interesting to see if they get in redshirt freshman Emory Jones at quarterback, considering he's probably the best fit out of all three. And at one point last year, everybody was expecting him to take over and win the starting job outright as a freshman, but he ended up redshirting and not getting it. Right now, he's listed as third string on the depth chart. But he's the best fit for Dan Mullen's offense. So it's kind of hard to say, was last week for Tennessee, was it a wake-up, or was it just that they had the talent and they kind of just exploded on the mocks because of not the lack of talent, but the talent mismatch?
Right. Now I want to gather your insight on this. If Tennessee doesn't win this, let's just say they don't, do you think it's important for them to at least look like they put up a fight, show them how good they were when they in the game? Do they at least have to show off that they actually put up a fight? Do you think they need to at least look good for this game?
I think they need to look good. They got to show something. I mean, they need to show something. They need to look better than they did last year against Florida. I think they will. But it's a tall order to go down into Gainesville anytime and win. And we don't know if this is a really bad Tennessee team or if they could have beaten UTC last week by a lot more than they did, and they pulled their starters relatively early in the game, which wasn't surprising. But you think that Tennessee they need to keep the fans in their corner and showing up for games. They need to show some fight.
Right. Before we got cut off on our accident on my part, we were discussing about how tough this game is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think on both sides, Florida's got a great defense, but they're without their starting quarterback. Tennessee, they've started to show that they can run the ball a little bit. Tennessee has to run the ball and have balance on offense. And Chaney is great. Is a great coordinator at simplifying the offense to his quarterback strengths, and he's got to keep doing that with Garantano, who looked night and day better against last week than he had to open the season. And Tennessee has to run the ball. If they're going to compete with Florida, they're going to have to run the ball and not go one-dimensional early in the game.
Right. So from what you're saying is they can pull this off, but they have to play differently than they usually tend to. They have to play differently, which now so that means I'm under the assumption you believe they can actually win this.
I think it's a long shot. There's always a chance. They'll have a lot of their, some of the players they're missing the last 2 weeks will be back. And Florida hasn't looked like, even for the injury, Florida hasn't exactly looked like as dominant as we thought coming into the season. I mean, they beat Miami 24-20, we thought it was going to be a nice win, but then Miami's kind of hit the skids. But against Kentucky, they didn't look great. They looked better actually after the injury and Trask came in. But was that just adrenaline, or is he a good quarterback? He's a good quarterback if you're playing in the SEC, but does he have what it takes to lead Florida to where they expected to be at the end of the season? We don't know that yet. So I think it's going to be a very tough game. I think it's going to be a physical game. It always is. And I think Tennessee's got to play well. I'm not calling for a Tennessee win. They've beaten Florida 3 times in the last 20 years, 3 or 4 times in the last 20 years. So you don't ever really want to call a game for Tennessee before when they're playing Florida. But I mean, there's a chance. There's always a chance. We'll just have to see. We don't really know what we have with Tennessee right now. If it was going by the first 2 games, I would be worried for the Vol fans that this was going to be an absolute beatdown.
Oof.
But they showed significant improvement in a couple fronts last week. I think, like I say, I think it's going to be a long shot, but there's a chance.
Right. So let's say we give Florida the win here, and do you think it's going to be completely one-sided, or do you think Tennessee is going to have some fight in them?
I think it depends on what happens early. If Tennessee comes out and is able to establish some sort of rhythm, then Florida's going to have a fight on their hands. If Florida gets up early by a big, let's say 14-0 in the first quarter, then Tennessee will be in for a long day because I don't see them coming back, being strong enough to come back from an early significant margin.
All right. Tommy, your insight is always appreciated. But now, there's another game I want you to talk about, and it's one of your games of the week. Notre Dame at Georgia. They had their last meeting back in 2017. That was 2 years ago. Before we went on the air, Uncle David wanted us to talk about this and describe to us quite frankly, the hype of this game. He doesn't think the hype is as big as we expect it to be. Well, I'm going on social media now. There's talk of it. There's a lot of people are singing praises of this game. Is it really as big as the deals are making it out to be?
I think, Notre Dame's looked pretty good, but they haven't looked as good as Georgia at this point. I think Georgia's rolling at the moment, and they should. One of the reasons you're seeing a lot of good, conversation, but then outside of it, there wasn't a huge amount of hype, in the media first of the week, is because Georgia's opened up as a 10-point favorite, and I think it has gone up to, I think Georgia's expected to win this game. Notre Dame, it's basically they got most of what they had last year when they completely wet the bed in the playoffs. And I think, from my point of view, I don't see Notre Dame. Yeah, right now it's a 14.5 point. Notre Dame's 14.5 point underdogs, and the game's at Georgia. I mean, that's a big. That's a big spread right there, and a lot of people are expecting Georgia, and a lot of money's going on Georgia right now. So,
not to mention, I'm looking at the list here. You put Georgia at number 4 as the kickoff top 25. You put them at 4.
Right.
Ooh. Undefeated streak so far.
3, 4, 5, and 6 are very interchangeable. With those, it depends on basically right now. It's depending on who they played at their schedule. Georgia dropped. They started off, I think, at number 3, number 4. So they're back at number 4, and they dropped a spot when they played Murray State, which who they blew out, but it was they're playing down a division where Ohio State's jumped up because they haven't played the toughest schedule yet, but they haven't played down. They've played all 3 of their opponents been from from the FBS, so you're not going to see them drop down as of yet. Where LSU's played a tough team and they've played a weak team. So those 4 teams, Oklahoma, Georgia, Ohio State, and LSU, are all very, very tight. But there's a big gap from them down to the Florida, Notre Dame, Michigan.
Yeah.
Which, we think those 3 teams are 3 or 4 teams are very interchangeable in those positions, but there's a bit of a gap from there down to Florida, Notre Dame. We think those teams are a step above teams like Notre Dame and Florida and Michigan right now.
Right. Also, games of the week, we have Utah and Southern California, Michigan at Wisconsin. Outside of the games we just talked about, what games are you looking forward to, Chief?
I'm interested in Michigan, Wisconsin to an extent because Michigan was a team that started way up high on our ratings, on Phil Steele's rankings. I think in the AP, they've looked horrendous. They haven't lost yet, but, they took last second miracles, or not miracle, but last second heroics to knock off Army at home, and then they didn't look great against MTSU, two teams you would expect a top 5 team to be able to handle pretty easily. Now they've got Wisconsin, who, a lot of people had underrated maybe going into the season. They're 2-0 at this point. But we really don't we don't know if that's just the schedule yet, but they've jumped up to number 22, so it's two ranked teams playing. I think anybody's just waiting to see something from Harbaugh's team, to see if they are for real or if they, are overranked again, and whether they're going to show any fight when they play Ohio State later in the year. Right.
Like I said, when Michigan at Wisconsin, you have Michigan at number 10 and Wisconsin, as you said, on number 22. That's a giant leap there. Top 10 versus one who's barely scratching out the 25. Do you think that Notre Dame is just going to wipe Michigan?
No, because if you look, last week you look at the last two kickoffs, Michigan's dropped from number 3 to number 8, and then from number 8 to number 10. And, I think Wisconsin, like I say, Wisconsin they didn't play last week, so you didn't see a lot of movement for them, neither did Michigan. But, I think Wisconsin's a team that could jump up and keep climbing higher and higher. Michigan right now, they look like a team that's falling. The momentum swings has been obvious. This is the first real test for both of them, but, Wisconsin wiped out South Florida 49-0, and they beat. Wisconsin hadn't been scored on yet this year. They've won 49-0 and 61-0. Now, you've got to give Army a little credit. They're a much better program than they were a couple of years ago, and they won their off 10-game season, but they should not be competing against Michigan. And the only reason we still have Michigan ranked as high as they are is because of the level of talent they have. I think Wisconsin could very easily pull off an upset if the same Michigan team that we saw the last 2 weeks shows up to play Wisconsin, then we could see an upset.
Oh, yes. Again, I want to take the moment to say, Tommy, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and talk to me. Well, I would say, as but Uncle David is, again, in rehabilitation. He is doing fine. He is at home at rest. There is a possibility we'll see him in the future. Before we sign off, one more time, Tommy, how can our friends get the kickoff?
They can give us a call at 423-267-0953, or they can log on to thekickoffstore.com.
And as always, every Friday, if time allotted, you will hear his voice. You'll hear me trying my best to keep up with him. And as always, tune in to the clubhouse. Tommy, again, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again next Friday.
All right. Thanks, Ethan.
You're welcome.